There are 248 abilities in total in competitive Pokemon currently. Now, you might think that that's more than enough for us competitive players, but you're wrong. There are Pokemon that could benefit from a certain boost via abilities that just don't exist yet, or won't ever exist yet. But I decided to make a list of a few of them I thought would be interesting. Note, these abilities are really just abilities that I think would be cool in theory. I don't necessarily mean that they would be purely positive for competitive Pokemon, and I'm not necessarily saying that they're needed. This is mostly just for fun. First ability. We all know about Rockhead. It's an ability that negates the damage from moves that have recoil damage. It's an ability that belongs to Pokemon like Hisui and Arcanine, Rhydon and Tyrantrum. It's a great ability for Pokemon with a huge attack stats, but are fairly frail because of their stats or typing, or both. The most notable Pokemon to have ever used this was probably Aerodactyl in the early gens. He has an incredibly high speed and attack stats, but was also an incredibly frail Pokemon who had common weaknesses to types like Ice, Water, Rock, and Electric. So Rockhead helped him stay on the field just a little bit longer so he could take advantage of his recoil moves like Double Edge, since his defensive stats and typings weren't really helping him. However, an ability that does not exist is one that heals you if you use a move with recoil damage. I'm pretty bad with names, so I didn't come up with one, and by that I mean that I didn't really try to come up with one, but the easiest ways it could function is simply where, like Flare Blitz, for example, instead of losing 1/3 of your HP, you gain it back. Because it's far more of a defensive ability, I think Pokemon that could benefit from it is, for example, Paldean Tauros, because it has access to Wave Crash, Chestnut because it has access to Wood Hammer, and it's already supposed to be a bulky grass but has an unfortunate typing of grass and fighting. Decidueye, who has access to Brave Bird, or Zebstrika and Boltund, who have both access to Wild Charge. This ability would work well on Pokemon who don't have access to Reckless or Rockhead and are frail. And let's face it, pretty much forgotten Pokemon in general. Can this ability be overpowered? Maybe on the right Pokemon, but none of these Pokemon would be overpowered because they are very weak already, which is why I would be giving them this ability. And if a 135 base attack stat Koraidon with Orichalcum Pulse isn't banned, then I don't think Boltund with this ability would be too much of an issue personally. Next is an ability that can definitely be overpowered more than the last one. It's more than anything a very gimmicky ability. It's an ability for my personal perverse fantasies, which is one that lets you retain stat changes even after switching out. The last ability that I introduced was very similar to Rockhead or Reckless, in the sense that it helps negate and combat the negative effects of recoil damage. However, there is no ability like the one I am describing that would let you retain stat changes after switching out. This ability would obviously need to be given to a Pokemon that's really bottom of the barrel, and to be fair, I think that it should also retain the negative stat changes as well to combat the fact that it could be pretty overpowered. It would have to be an ability kind of like Wonder Guard, in the sense that it would need to be given to a Pokemon who sucks so bad that that's the only way you could justifiably give it this ability. So given all of that, I think the Pokemon that I could reasonably give this ability to are Noctowl, for example, who has access to Agility and Calm Mind for setup moves, but does not have an offensive stat over 86, and its highest stat is its HP stat at 100. Offensively, it's not all that scary. Like, its best stat move is Hyper Voice, which, oh yeah, you're definitely gonna get all the KOs with that move. This ability could finally help it be a good setup sweeper, even in the lower tiers. Next is Carbink. Carbink is just the little guy. You look at him and he's very cute. You just want to put him in your pocket. But competitively, he's not very great, like at all. It has two very high defensive stats, both at 150, and it does have access to Body Press. However, it is no Skarmory. It is not particularly impressive because it has a 50 base HP stat and a terrible defensive typing of Fairy and Rock, mostly just the Rock type being horrible. It also has Sturdy, which I want to know who in Game Freak keeps giving defensive Pokemon Sturdy. It is very, very dumb. But anyways, this ability could finally give it a bit of an edge. For boosting moves, it has Iron Defense, Calm Mind, and Rock Polish, which is good because it has a 50 base HP stat and a 50 base attack and special attack. Next is Hypno. This predator-looking Pokemon has been incredibly mid. Not even mid, just really, really bad. It has 3 pretty useless abilities and a very mid pure psychic typing, both defensively and offensively. Its only particularly impressive stat is its 115 base special defense, but it's not particularly a defensive Pokemon, and it's not particularly an offensive Pokemon as well. It's not much of anything. Offensively, it has a 73 base special attack stat and physical attack stat. It has a 67 base speed stats, so even by ZU standards, it's very unimpressive, but it does have both Calm Mind and Nasty Plot, so it could take advantage of. But this ability could definitely be overpowered on the right Pokemon that is just pathetic enough. It could actually give it an edge and maybe make it rise up a tier or two. Next is probably the most normal out of all these abilities, or at least the ability that is the one that is most likely to be actually made by Game Freak, which is Intimidate for special attackers. I think the name Outsmart would be a cool name for this ability, but I could also be completely delusional. Anyways, this ability doesn't really need any explanation, but I'm going to elaborate on about why it would be so significant, which is that running a special attacker is much less of a risk to run than a physical attacker, because physical attackers need to watch out for Burn and Intimidate, whereas special attackers need to watch out for Blissey and Chansey, and that's pretty much it. I guess unlike physical attackers, special attackers don't have anything that can especially cripple them as easily or as immediately. I feel like this is one of the reasons that there is no special version of Dragon Dance, which is that special attackers would be very, very overpowered if they could just boost their speed and special attack stat at the same time. Other than just Will-O-Wisp, physical attackers have other moves to watch out for. For example, such as the infamous Scald, which just because the move is less distributed now, that doesn't mean that it completely erases the fact that it was omnipresent for the past 8 generations. This move seriously crippled physical attack. A 30% chance is honestly very huge. People would literally choose that versus a higher base power move because they know that, yeah, you could do more damage with the other, but the fact that you could cripple a physical attacker that easy is far, far too good of an opportunity to pass by. Then some of the most popular Pokemon in the OU tier had abilities that directly crippled physical attackers, like for example, the infamous Zapdos, who has Static, which paralyzes you and cripples your speed if you make a physical contact move, or Flame Body, which burns you, again, if you make a physical contact. Also, I mentioned how Blissey and Chansey were really the only things stopping special attackers from wreaking havoc. And that's true, but also in current Gen 9 OU, Stall isn't really seen as much, and neither is Balance. Now, I'm not saying it doesn't exist, it's just that Stall and Balance aren't really that popular anymore. And because it's not that common, that's significant, since those two types of teams are the types of teams that are most likely to feature Blissey and Chansey. So because they're not really common anymore, neither are those two blobs. This is seen by the fact that Blissey keeps falling from OU to RU back to UU, and Chansey is the same, because Gen 9 OU isn't hospitable towards them. So that means that special attackers don't even have to worry about them anymore. Special attackers being low-key overpowered kind of relies on the viability of these two Pokemon. Physically though, they never really had a Pokemon like that. For example, Skarmory is probably the best physical one. Skarmory never had the same chokehold on physical attackers that Chansey and Blissey had on special attackers. You didn't have to have a super high defense stat to cripple a physical attacker. Just Will-O-Wisp or some move that could have Burn as a side effect, or an ability like Static, for example, or Intimidate, which is why we need an ability like this to balance out the scales. I have no idea why it hasn't been introduced. After all, Intimidate is very popular in VGC as well, so you would think that Game Freak would have invented a special variant of this ability after all of these years. That being said, I think a Pokemon that could desperately need this ability is Chansey. I'm kidding. No, it does not need it. But this ability could go really on a plethora of Pokemon, just like there really is no certain type of Pokemon who has Intimidate. Other than them being a physical attacker, there's no specific typing that they tend to have this ability for. So that being said, Pokemon that I could see running this ability or benefit from this are special attackers, or at least mixed attackers like Oranguru, Meganium, and Florges especially. Game Freak, I am begging you, please give Florges a good ability. And Galarian Articuno too. Like I said, boring or loser Pokemon that either no one likes or Game Freak has seemed to kind of forget about. As always, feel free to comment. I know some of these abilities are very overpowered, and by that I mean it seems like a 12-year-old made them, but I think that they could be cool in theory.
Yeah.